Hey, my name is Greg Kenny. I'm the program coordinator for the Palm Springs Air Museum, and it's my honor and my privilege to get to work with gentlemen such as those that you'll hear from today and sort of get to put together events such as these. And I tell you, I really get to enjoy that quite a bit. Now, we start off these programs the same every time, and that, of course, is with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'll ask you all to please rise and remove your hats while the Civil Air Patrol Squadron 11 presents our colors. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. Thank you, Palm Springs Civil Air Patrol Squadron 11. Excellent job as usual. It's a real honor and a privilege for us to have the Civil Air Patrol meeting right here in the Air Museum over in the next hangar. I cannot thank them enough. They do the color guard service for us on occasion, and they always do such an excellent job. How about one more hand for the Civil Air Patrol today, folks? All right. Well, I've got a few more people that whenever I get a microphone in my hand, I always try to make sure I thank them. The first, of course, being our volunteers. These are the folks in the white shirts with the name badges here today that if you have a wristband on, or if anybody talked to you about the airplanes, or maybe something just as simple as where's the cafe, if you got an answer, more than likely it came from a volunteer. These are the folks that are the heart and soul of the Palm Springs Air Museum. We couldn't do a thing without them. Would you folks mind giving them a round of applause? Thank you. Another group I'd like to thank is that of our members here at the museum. It's the membership in the museum that enables us to have the electricity to turn the lights on and power the microphones and all that kind of stuff, work on the airplanes, have programs such as this. If you're here today and you're enjoying the Air Museum and you're thinking, boy, I'd like to come back here and maybe I'll bring some family members back next time and maybe some grandkids and anybody I know. Well, maybe you want to think about becoming a member here of the museum. We sure love to have you. We sure appreciate your support. And not only do you get to support the museum, but you get some personal benefits as well. You get to come anytime you like, which is a nice thing. You also have access to our library. We've got over 8,500 books up there, World War II and aviation related primarily. Those are all for you to check out, read, explore. Also, we've got an amazing collection of DVDs, documentaries, movies, many of which are older films that you might not find anywhere else. So please, if you're thinking it over, thinking maybe I might like to be a member, please do so today. The folks in the gift shop will be happy to collect your information, and we'd love to have you. The last group, and I know we have some here today, being that this is the 100th Bomb Group reunion, that of course is our veterans and active duty military. If you're here today and you've served in our armed forces, would you please raise your hand to be recognized? Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for our freedom. We would not, absolutely would not be here without these amazing people. So I cannot thank them enough. Well, I guess this turns to the point now where we're going to talk a little bit about our program today. Obviously, we're standing in front of this outstanding 100th Bomb Group display. If you haven't taken a look at it yet, please make sure you do after the program today. It's always being updated. Mr. Bob Wilf, Mr. Mike Faley are in here checking things out and making sure it's all looking as well as good as it possibly can with fresh and updated displays all the time. And now they're here to do even a little more work. They're going to share with us a little bit of their history, talk about what it was that they experienced during World War II, as we know with the B-17s that were flying out of England, and Thorpe Abbott's in particular, they saw some tremendous things, and they had to sacrifice, a tremendous amount in order for us to have what we have today. I cannot thank them enough for their service, and of course thank them for coming out and putting on this program today. We've got some great speakers in store. I'm going to go ahead and let Bob tell you a little more about that. But before I do, I know the 100th experienced a tragedy just the other evening, and I want to express the museum's most solemn condolences. Bob will share a little more about that, but please know that this museum feels it very deeply, and we feel horribly about what happened. And so, Bob, I hate to turn it over to you on that note, but I felt it incumbent upon me to say a little bit of something.
Thanks, Greg. Greg is one of our one of the docents here. He's actually in charge of education, and he's done a very fine job. Thanks, Greg. He did mention our loss last night. Bob Matheson died as a result of an automobile hit he and his wife Lorraine. She's in the hospital. We don't quite know what her condition is yet. And just for a moment, let's have a moment of silence. Okay. We've got a wonderful speaker, and Mike Faley is going to introduce her, and probably a few others. So, Mike, if you'll come over here and take over, I'd appreciate it.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank Greg and the incredible staff here at the Palm Springs Air Museum for their generosity, their courteousness, and obviously keeping the history of the air war and aviation possible for future generations to see. I'd also like to thank all of our veterans, their families, and everybody for being here. We did experience a tragic loss last night. And as any air crewman or anybody out there, you know that it's a tough thing to lose a person and a family member, and they were part family of the 100th family. But Bob was at his best being at our reunions. He had a smile on his face. He loved Cleveland. I talked to the daughters and the family this morning. He goes, they are here, and they wanted to be here. They said there was nothing more, their family was never more happy than the smile on the face they got to be here with their family, the 100th Bomb Group. So we can take solace in that. Today we have, 100th Bomb Group, the Hard Luck Group, the Bloody 100th, the group that may not have lost the most amount of bombers during World War II, but when we lost big. And if you went into London during World War II and you got a chance to dance with one of those girls at one of those dances, and she asked you what group you were with, and you'd say, well, I'm with the 100th Bomb Group. She goes, get away from me. She goes, you're dead already. She'd be tossing away. They would be, you're not supposed to be here. Our guys went through a lot, just like everybody did in the 8th Air Force. It was rough times. We started our first mission on June 25th, 1943. To an auspicious start, we lost 3 crews on the very first mission, shot down. That's 30 men gone immediately, and I would say the life and death of war hit home very quickly for this group. It was felt both in the air crews and in the ground crews, which we have a few ground people here today, especially Dewey Christopher and Scott Morton, whose dad was with the 349th on the ground. Today we have 2 great speakers. One of them has never been to a reunion before. This is his very first time. So I coerced him, and that is the word, coerced him to speak today. And his name is Jack Fuhrer, and he'll be up here in a second. But the other one is Janey LeMay Lodge, General LeMay's daughter, and she has some great stories. I had the honor of meeting her last year, and again, she accepted our invitation to speak here today, and I look forward to you hearing her stories. And we're going to have a question and answer with her after her speech. First, I'd like to bring up Jack to say a few words about his time with the 100th Bomb Group. Jack?
Yes, he did
asked me to speak, and I don't know why. But I flew with the 100th Bomb Group when I was 20 years old. I graduated from cadets as a second lieutenant at 19 years old. After gathering my crew together, I was sent overseas to join the 100th Bomb Group. I didn't get off to a very good start because when I got there, Colonel Jeffrey was the group commander, and he always wanted to fly with the new crews. He wanted to see if they could take off, land, how they could do formation, how their crew would react. So he joined me in the airplane and we went up for a flight. And everything went fine. And as we ended the flight, he said, okay, you'll be in combat soon. But he says, you know, I haven't flown in a while, and I would like to make a few landings. He said, if you'll jump in the right seat, he said, I'll take the left seat and we'll go fly and make a few landings. So I said, fine, what else can I say? He was a colonel and I was a brand new second lieutenant, 20 years old, with probably 200 flying hours. And I jumped in the right seat and he got in the left, and we took off. And on the first landing, as we started to approach, I noticed that the airspeed was a little slow. So I said to the colonel, I said, Colonel, you better add a little power. And he just kind of turned his head and looked at me. He didn't say anything. And it got a little lower, a little slower. And I said to him again, Colonel, you better go ahead and add some power. And he turned around and he looked at me and he said, son, I'm flying this airplane. So I just kept quiet. Well, we landed short and we bounced over a fence and we bounced onto the runway. And he stopped the aircraft and he says, you know, I haven't flown in a while. He says, I should go back up and make a couple more landings. And I said, not with me in the airplane, I'm done. So I didn't get off to a good start, and I probably wasn't his favorite pilot. But I flew with the 349 Squadron. I flew last he came home. And the first two flights I had, I flew as co-pilot with an experienced crew, and then I picked up my own crew. We had quite a few missions. Some were milk runs, and some were not. Some were pretty bad. I don't know why, but Mike wants me to tell you about my last mission. And my last mission was on December 29th in 1944. Our target was Frankfurt. And as we gathered together and started down towards Frankfurt, they had a great plan. That was to fake a flight towards Frankfurt and then make a turn, swing around, and come back from the opposite direction. Well, that worked out fine except for two things. One is we turned around, we were supposed to maintain radio silence, and someone said, well, we'll start our turn in the Frankfurt. I could just picture all the gunners down there wringing their hands, saying, oh, goody, here they come. And as we turned from the IP on the final bomb run, we ran into the jet stream, which was unfamiliar to us at the time. So we only had a ground speed of approximately 100 miles an hour. And I said, here it comes. And as we went down, we were hit by flak, many flak guns up, pointed directly at us. As we released the bombs, my aircraft got hit on the left side. And the left wing and the two left engines were on fire. The flames were flowing back past the tail section, and the airplane, from the impact, threw it upwards and off to the right. And how we missed other aircraft, I don't know, because the aircraft was totally out of control. I was expecting an explosion right away, so I gave the bailout order. And the fellows up in front heard me, and so they bailed out. And I found myself trapped in the seat. My flak suit was caught in the seat and I couldn't get out. So I said, well, if I'm going to save myself, I better straighten up the airplane. We dropped about 14,000 feet, and I got the airplane out of the dive, and when I did, it blew the flames out. And about that time, I heard voices from the back of the aircraft, and I heard somebody say, "What's going on up there?" And it seems that when I gave the bailout order, I had pulled my throat mic away from my throat, and the fellows in the back didn't hear me. And I was too new to remember to ring the alarm bell. So they were still there. I still had 5 people in the back of the aircraft. I was having trouble maintaining altitude, and I told the crew, I said, throw everything out of the airplane, guns, everything you got, because I have to lighten the aircraft. So they threw everything out, and the waist gunner came up, and I said, hand me a map. He said, a map? I threw them all out. I said, how much can a map weigh? We had no navigation equipment, and we were lost in the clouds. So I took a heading towards England, and about that time a P-51 pulled up next to me, and through hand signals he said, follow me. He knew we were lost, and so we followed him until he ran low of fuel. And once he ran low of fuel, he took off and told us just to stay on the same heading. Well, the heading took us right over London, and we were at very low altitude at this time, still losing altitude. 2 engines shut down on the left side. And the gunners in London started shooting at us. They thought we were a German aircraft in disguise. So we dodged any more damage there and headed back to Thorpe Abbott. And we got back to Thorpe Abbott, and the rest of the crew survived. But three of my people became prisoners of war, and the engineer, who was Bob Garrison, was his name, tech sergeant, he was killed in action. That was my last mission. At the time we were supposed to complete 30 missions. That was my 29th mission. And because of stress, they sent me home with just 29 missions. At the time, like I say, I was 20 years old. Didn't know a whole lot, wasn't very worldly, but I survived. All my crew has died since that time, except for the waist gunner. I'm not even sure he's gone. He made the reunion last year. I couldn't make it. So this is my first reunion, and I've enjoyed talking to everyone. I'm sorry that I don't know everyone, but the reason I don't know them is when we arrived in England, Colonel Jeffrey gave us a talk, and he said, don't make friends because they won't be here tomorrow. And he was right. So I hope you're all friends now, and I appreciate everyone coming here, and I've heard some great war stories. I have a few more to tell, but I'm not going to. Thank you.
Our next guest, we have a very distinguished honored guest here. I recommend if you get a chance to buy this book, probably one of the, there's 2 great books on General Curtis LeMay. This is one of them, and the other one is by a navigator by the name of Ralph Nutter that had served with him both in Europe and in the Pacific. It's very rare that we get an insight into probably one of the greatest generals we ever had in the Air Force, in the USAAF. Robert Rosenthal, who was the most decorated man in the 8th Air Force, said that the greatest general and the greatest air commander we ever had was General Curtis C. LeMay. And he was correct. And I'd like to bring up his daughter, Janey LeMay Lodge, to speak about her dad. And afterwards, we're going to take question and answer.
Maybe me with that? Maybe not. Okay. Curtis Emerson LeMay. Much has been written about his illustrious career over the years. Navigator, pilot, leader of the 305th Bomb Group in Europe, B-29 operations in the Pacific. After the war, commander of Air Forces Europe, Berlin Airlift, Strategic Air Command, Chief of Staff, United States Air Force, member of the Joint Chiefs under John F. Kennedy. Honored by numerous awards from this country and from Europe. But who was this man who was called Iron Pants, Stone-Faced, Cigar-Chomping, Legend, Giant of a General? Well, it is my privilege today to tell you a little bit about who this man was after he went home at the end of the day and closed the world away and became a husband and a father. There are many, starting out maybe when we were in Europe, this would have been 1946 when he had Air Forces Europe. And of course I was about 8 years old then, and we lived in a fantastic 102-room house that had belonged to Adam Henkel, who was a champagne baron, and I guess it had been borrowed, I hope it was borrowed, from for the Air Force, because at that time there was only one hotel, so most of the visiting firemen would come and they would stay in the house with my parents. And it looked a little bit, you know, like the upstairs, downstairs. I mean, there were 36 servants that came with this house. And my mother, of course, had to hire and fire, and she had 17. That was the least amount they could use. She tells the story that it cost, that year that they were there, it cost $3,000 of their savings and all of his pay for that year just to run the house. And of course, we didn't have a lot of the amenities that we were all on rations there too. So if we wanted meat, my father went out and hunted and we ate. He would get boar. So my mother learned to make boar many, many, many ways. And so we enjoyed it. And I remember that that was a very tough time, and a time that they never knew what the Russians were going to be doing. So we needed to leave quickly. We always had a car that was already had supplies and everything, and we would go to Switzerland. And I remember one Christmas Eve, there was a flap and a scary time, and they were having a very high-level meeting, and I was upset because I knew that if they didn't go home, Santa Claus wasn't going to come. But it was a wonderful time, and even during the war, my father wrote to my mother every day, and I have those letters, and he came home. We were living with my grandparents in Ohio, and he came home twice during those 4 years. And I remember we lived on a wonderful street with Victorian houses with big porches, and in the summertime, the fathers who hadn't gone to war would sit out on the porches, and I always felt that some of the people probably thought I didn't have a father, and that was very difficult. And I think the first time my father came home, it was in the dead of winter, and I remember that he sat on that front porch in freezing cold so that I would know that I had a father and everybody else on the street did too. So when people think that he was gruff, and they hated to talk to him because they thought that he was, well, I think he was very professional, but he was a very quiet and a very modest individual. And if you would come up and talk to him, if you talked to him about something he was interested in, he was a great hunter, he was a fisherman, he had many hobbies. He was, I've forgotten what you call it, but he talked to people on the radio, was a ham radio operator, and he loved to talk to people, and his favorite people were kids. If people would come to visit him, immediately he would put them in the back room and show them, I said propaganda films on the Air Force. But he loved kids, and he loved to talk to them, and told many stories. Well, then we moved to Omaha, Nebraska in 1948, And of course then, no one knew where Omaha, Nebraska was, and I guess that was the reason for putting SAC there. And we were there for 11 years. And many interesting, fun people came through visiting my parents. And it was known in the Air Force at that time, we always had very interesting animals and pets. And one of the pets that we had was a dachshund. And my mother had had a poodle, and she thought that my father should have a dog that loved him and was just his dog. So we were given this beautiful black and tan dachshund named Herman. Well, Herman became my mother's dog, and anyone that would come to visit us, immediately they would come through the door and they'd hug my mother and they'd say, "Oh, it's so nice to see you." Well, the dog was right there, and nipping at their feet in probably ripped pants. My mother said she spent more money on replacing men's pants than buying her own wardrobe. And Herman became very famous in the Air Force because any time my father would have a meeting, the first item of business was, who was the latest person here who had been bitten by Herman? And if you hadn't, well, everybody at least wanted to be nipped. And we also had a parakeet that lived in the house, and at night he had his cage in the back bedroom, and he'd go back, and he had his wings clipped so he couldn't fly away. But he liked to come to the lunch table or the dinner table. Well, they had a dinner party one afternoon, and which I want to read you a letter because I think it's very cute. This was the Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, came for lunch. And not knowing that, assuming from the letter that he had an altercation with the dog, but he also had one with the parakeet. The parakeet would come to the table and walk all over the table. He wouldn't walk on the plate and in your food, but if you started to take a bite, he'd hop on your fork, and if he liked you, he'd lean way back and let you eat. If he didn't, he'd nip you on the nose. Well, of course, then it became my mother's bird. Do something with the bird. Well, there's not very little you can do with a bird. And so at the end of the meeting, and they said goodbye, well, my mother receives this lovely note on his stationery, and he says, "Permit me to thank you for a gracious hospitality to me when I was in Omaha. I greatly enjoyed seeing you again. I appreciate the attention paid me by the parakeet and the pooch." Thank you very much. And I always think of the privilege that we had to be able to meet some of the people that my father became very close to. And I remember he was very close to Prince Bernhard, and they met in Germany when they were both hunting, and he would come to SAC. He came a couple of times. And of course, when I first met him, I thought, you have a prince, and he's coming. He should have white ermine cloak, or he should come in on a horse or whatever. At that age, I thought, here we have, a prince. Well, he came and he wanted to. My mother always gave my father a sandwich or something before they went out at night to a party, because it would get very late before they would be able to sit down and eat. And so he said, "No, I want to go in the kitchen." My mother said, "I'm going to make a hamburger or a cheese sandwich or something." He said, "No, I want to go in the kitchen and I want to help you." And I thought, I thought, no, he should be sitting and being waited on. But it turned out he was a very loving man, and was very close to my parents for many years. After we moved from Omaha to Washington, we had many visits from various people that my parents always believed in entertaining at home. They thought that, people coming from foreign countries, it's a gift when you have someone come to your home. And they would have the other chiefs staffs from the other air forces or the air attaches, and they would always have the dinner parties at home. And that's one way, I think, of extending your hand in friendship with people from the other countries, and it certainly helped, I think, in getting along with many of those people. But there are many stories and different things that I can talk about. But if people want to ask me questions, I mean, I haven't covered nearly enough. It's, but just knowing that that he was not the gruff individual that so many people know. Of course, he was doing his job, and he was a professional. But when he was away and he was home, he had a tremendous sense of humor. And as I said, he got along great with people who would want to, all of a sudden, would want to talk to you about some of the hobbies that you have. And he certainly was a good father to me. And of course, I think it would have been nice if I could have been half a daughter and half a son, because he taught me how to shoot. So for a while there, I was pretty good with a shotgun. And I thought it would be nice one of these days to learn how to fly a plane. And he came home one day with enough books to cover the dining room table, and he says, "When you read these, we'll talk about it." Well, I don't think I got through very many of those. I would rather fly with him. But I appreciate you having me here today, and let me share some of the things that I remember about him. But I'd be happy to answer questions from anyone.
Were you an only child?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Janey, tell the story you told me when we met last year about how your dad, when you had parties, they always had it at the house, and how he would utilize that without everybody around to give an opinion. Your dad would always listen to everybody.
Well, I think the one way, of course, I've always told my son too, the best way to learn anything about anyone is to listen. And don't you do the talking. And I think this is what happened a lot with my father. People would come up to him, and of course they would be so nervous that they are they are now in the company of, and they would just start talking and talking and talking. And that's the way he learned everything. He probably learned more than those people wanted to say. And but he would sit, and he was very social. It's been written so many times that he didn't have any social graces, but he certainly did when people came to the home and they had dinner parties. I mean, one instance that I remember, this doesn't have to do with a dinner party, but this was Davy Jones, who ended up being the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and the head of the Joint Chiefs. Was Daddy's aide in 1956, I think. And his first day on duty was they were flying. They were flying from the base to another base. And usually when they did that, the plane would pull up on the tarmac. And they would put the cockpit door down, and he could either go up into the cockpit that way, or he would go into it was the 707, the KC-135, and the door was huge and would open, and they had the big stairs that went up, and the whole crew would be standing there. And usually that's the way he went up. Well, this day he decided he was going to go up the ladder into the cockpit. Well, just as he got to the top, they shut the door, and it hit him on the head, and the hat went down a little. He didn't say anything. He backed down, went around, went up the main, and everything was fine, and he ended up sitting in the pilot's seat. He always took the planes off. And he got up, evidently, to go to the bathroom a while later, and they had not closed the trap door there that goes down into the ladder, so he fell into the hole. And of course, I guess he climbed out, never said anything, didn't say a word. Well, by this time, a few people were probably sweating. And he walks back to the back of the plane to go to the bathroom, and as he's waiting to go into the bathroom, the door opens and hits him in the face. And, well, I guess he did what he needed and walked back, landed the plane, and then when he got to the base, they always had the base commander and the other commander always there to welcome them, and the commander said, "Well, General, how was your flight?" And he said, "If I didn't know better, I would think they were trying to kill me." So he did have a good sense of humor.
In Fort Collins, Colorado, there's a street named LeMay.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a Colorado connection with the family?
Not that I know.
I was wondering where he went to school, or maybe he went to the academy.
No, he was from Ohio. He was from Columbus, Ohio. Went to school there. Went to South High School, as I remember, in Columbus, Ohio. And went to Ohio State University. And in those days, you know, he came from a rather poor family, and they did not have any of the connections to go to the academies like you do today. So he went to Ohio State and then on to flight school.
Thank you. What do you remember about his relationship with Eisenhower and with Churchill?
Well, I really don't. See, when people ask me some of these kind of questions, I mean, I was either a teenager or I was much younger, and he never spoke about anything when he came home at the dinner table. Not even not with when there were some really bad flaps, and he did not. I think I remember one day when we were in Washington, he was chief of staff, and I was going to the University of Maryland, and I had a convertible, and he told me at breakfast. He said, "I think you should put the top up on the car today." And I said, "Why? It's such a nice day." "Well, you don't ask twice." He just said, "No, you keep it. You know, keep the top up today." But no, he. And that's probably a good thing. I mean, a lot of people probably talk about politics and talk about their work and all, but he never did that.
This is on a little bit different subject. Your dad was involved with sports car racing on the airfields in America. But the story goes that the first, and I remember reading about this in Sports News, he bought 2 Allard race cars for the Le Mans 24-hour race. But when they showed up in the pits, they weren't British Racing Green. They were Air Force Blue.
Yes.
They ran 2 laps, retired to the pits, and were later loaded onto an Air Force airplane and flown to the States, and then raced at Air Force races in this country. Can you talk about his interest in that sport?
Yes, he. In fact, I have a bill for those 2 Allard race cars. I met a man that lives in Iowa who was researching the other race car that he raced on, you know, on the airfields until the Air Force said you can't do that anymore. But yes, he was, and he raced for a while himself, and then he couldn't do that anymore. And he did have a driver that went around to the circuit, and he always had race cars. I mean, we had an Allard, and then we had one that he had built himself, and then I had the first Corvette that they made. And the interesting thing about that Corvette is that I've had several people call me to say, "I have your car." Well, there's no way they could have my car because I have the chassis and the body. The very first one just had those little windows, you know, that you stuck in. You know, they didn't wind up. And so if it rained and you're flying or, you know, you're driving around, you get the rain in. So I told my father, I just want roll-up windows. So he put a Sebring race engine in the chassis, took the chassis off and got a later Corvette that put on. So the one that I ended up selling when I got married was this kind of a mixture of everything. But yes, indeed, he was very interested in the race cars and building them. He could take an airplane engine apart, and he could build. He built a race car for himself also. So that was another hobby.
Thank you for coming. Does the name Irwin Prewer mean anything to you?
The last name is what?
Priwer.
No, I don't think so.
Thank you.
Oh, wish I could say yes.
The classic movie, Strategic Air Command, I think it was with starring Jimmy Stewart and Gene Allison. Was Jimmy Stewart's role at all based upon your father?
No. The individual in that movie who was really my father was I think it was Frank Lovejoy. Wasn't it Frank Lovejoy? With the cigar. And he was terribly allergic to cigars. And I don't think it was ever lit, but no, I remember, that was in '55. I remember when the whole crew came to Offutt to film. Mm-hmm.
In fact, Bernie Lay had to get approval to do that, if I'm not mistaken. He did the screenplay for it, and he had to get the approval from your dad in order to shoot that movie at a set air base.
Yeah, it was a good movie. Mm-hmm.
Freitas was with the original When I Was Gone group. My experience with your dad was very briefly, but we had a flight that went to Regensburg, Germany. We were so far inland that we decided to have a shuttle and fly on over the Alps and down the Mediterranean in North Africa. And while I was exchanging my 8 British pounds for a French franc, your dad was there. And usually it was a custom when you were in a foreign country, you had people sign your bills. It was called a short story. And so your dad signed the short story. And we talked briefly. He was a lieutenant colonel and I was a staff sergeant. He was very cordial. And it was my brief experience with him.
Shared a little bit about your dad being protective of you and putting the car top up. Mm-hmm. Was he tough on your dates, the boys that you went out with?
Well, you know, I think my mother was really the person who was talking to me more about that than my father was. He'd always say to my mother, "Have you told her about, or have you said anything about?" But I can tell you that. Well, he was strict enough that I never was going to get caught doing anything I shouldn't do. And if he said you're home at 10 or you're home at 11, I was, because I didn't want to do anything that was going to reflect on him. And of course, I think in those days, I think children were a little more respected of their parents than maybe they are today. And yes. But and I certainly would never have talked back to either one of them. But he could just look at you. I mean, if you knew you were doing something wrong, you just got this stare, and you knew that you really didn't want to do it again. But I can tell you that when I finally, my husband and I decided to get married, I remember sitting at the quarters in Washington. My parents were at one end of the living room, and Jim and I were at the other, and we said that we were going to get married, and he said, my father said to him, "Why stop now? They keep getting better." So, no, but I don't think he ever gave any of them a bad time. But probably like any father would be with his daughters, they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing.
Hello. Tim Winters, son of Robert Borgenik. He flew for your father. He was in the Hunter Bomb Group. But I have a dear friend whose uncle is Norman Sterling. And he was an elite guard, and he took care of your father. I was just wondering, how many guardsmen were with your dad on a regular basis?
Well, I know I have a very nice letter from one of those elite guardmen that I received about a year ago. And, well, I'm sure that they were there, but we didn't. I know that when we first moved to Washington, we lived at Fort Myer, and we lived in one of the duplexes, and I think that maybe that was the time that they had, you know, that wasn't Truman, someone tried to assassinate Truman. Then all of a sudden, we had a lot of guards, and they were around the house, and I remember that they would have those police dogs, and they would come to the back door, and our cook, you know, would talk to them. Well, you could pet the dogs, and they were just so friendly as long as they were on that leash. But if you took the leash off, then, but I never saw anywhere, if he was going anywhere, I never saw that there were several guards around, but I'm sure that, you know, they were pretty protected on the bases. I mean, it was very hard to get on those bases during that time. But they must have been there because I had a very nice letter from one of them.
Any other questions?
Hi, thanks for coming. My question actually concerns the Cuban Missile Crisis. Would you give us any insight as to what your family, what was going to happen to Kurt LeMay's family if the balloon went up?
Living in Washington, our plan was, my father was very close to Arthur Godfrey, and Arthur Godfrey had his farm, and his estate was in Leesburg, Virginia. Well, if we were all there and something was going to happen, we were supposed to get in the car and drive to Leesburg. But in those days, all those highways were those, they called them civil defense highways, and I don't think anybody would have gotten on. I didn't think we would have gotten there. If I was at the University of Maryland, we were told to go in the basement. And but the Cuban Missile Crisis, my husband and I were stationed at the Air Force Academy, and my friends here in the front row were there at the same time. And everyone was looking to me to know what to do because I was going to get the word from the top of what we should do. And at the time at the Air Force Academy, we were supposed to keep all the water and all the, remember? And all the canned goods and everything. And we were stationed at the Air Force Academy, and you had a big foot locker. And you were to fill it up, and you were to put it in your car. Now, the husbands were off somewhere, so this woman, with maybe 2 or 3 or 4 kids, was to lug this huge thing into her car and up to the academic area. Well, they finally figured out that was not going to work, so you were supposed to keep it in your basement. Well, my father never said anything to me, but everybody looked at me for the final word, and they kept saying, well, if she's not buying the water and the food, why should I do that? And he didn't. I think he would have, the only time he was at all concerned is when my husband and I were first married. My husband was in the Army, and we had orders to go to Germany. And he was a captain, and of course, we wouldn't have lived on a base, we would have been on the economy. And that was still the time when they had the Berlin Wall. And so my father said after the rehearsal, the wedding rehearsal, he said, I want you to ride with me in the staff car, I want to talk to you. And he said, now you're going to be going to Germany, and you don't know what's going to happen. And he told me, get yourself a pair of walking shoes, an airline credit card, and don't wait until the women and children are told to leave. You head for the Swiss border. Well, I have trouble finding from here to San Juan Capistrano without a map. So I'm thinking, how am I going to go through the woods and hope I'm going the right way? But he was concerned about that. But no, he would just expect that wherever I was going to be paying attention to what the local government people were saying. So I was kind of sorry for the people who kept saying that, geez, if I go down like the great ship, she never told me a thing.
Yes, ma'am. In today's military, there's a lot of emphasis placed on families with the multiple deployments families go through. Even down at the company level, commanders have leaders that when a unit deploys, that there's people take care of other families, if a new wife has a child, to help out, diapers or babysitting, money for food, stuff like that. And that's actually tracked, far up the chain of command. When your father was in and when your husband was in, was there still that emphasis placed on families at that time?
Absolutely. I think my father's greatest legacy is his caring for the men and women that worked under him and with him. And they were instrumental in starting, first it was dependents assistance, and then it was family services, which is still operational today. And my father felt that the man was not going to be able to feel good enough about his job, doing his job away, if he knew his family at home was not taken care of. And this is why family service was started, so that if there was a death or there was something, there was someone there to see that that family was taken care of while the man was on deployment. And that gives me an opportunity to say that after my parents were retired, they started the Janey and Mrs. Curtis LeMay Foundation. And our foundation is very active today, and I am the head of that. And we have a board, and our sole purpose is to take care of widows of Air Force personnel. That's enlisted and officers. And they're not loans, they're grants. And we do many things. We give them money to stay in their homes. We give them monthly stipends, and plus we've done many one time. We've done eyeglasses, hearing, wheelchairs, dental, anything that these women do. And I know my father felt, and I do too, is that these women served right along with you gentlemen, and they deserve to have a life of dignity. And I get many letters, and we're helping women now in 23 states stay in their home. And we're always looking. We have plenty of money, and we're always looking for more widows. And we're there. Our offices are in Riverside. And I really do think that's my father's greatest legacy, because he never felt that he did all of these things alone. It was always the people that were around him, that worked with him, that sat on those crews with him. And I know when he couldn't fly those missions anymore, he stood on the tarmac and counted those planes as they came home. So he flew with those people whether he was up there or not. So.
Jane, thank you so much. Folks, we have time for just a few more things. At the end of this program, I want to get all the vets up here. I want to get a group shot with all the vets and with Janey LeMay. And the other thing is we always have a tradition here when we finish off one of our reunions. One of the original group bombardiers by the name of Big Joe Armini, who spoke last year, serenaded us with a good night song, and we told him to get some tea and some honey for us, and so he could get his voice ready for us, and he would finish off our program with a little song. So would you like to hear that song? Big Joe.
I met Janey LeMay many times. The first time I met him was when I missed a target. And I was confronted, it's a long story. We were bombing the Renault plant in Paris, in the Seine River, and my pilot was Bill Veal and also Sam Barr. We got to the initial point, and the fact was, they had a tremendous 100-mile-an-hour crosswind. So the plane was crabbing across the target. Yes. And just before I released the bomb, a flak boat came inside the fire. And we had the first thing we did was go down 4,000 feet, and then leveled off, cut the fire up, and then we closed the bomb bay doors, and then we went down another 2,000 feet, because it came back behind again. And we were chased all the way back to England, practically. Well, as a result of that mission, I had as to why I had missed a target.
I guess I'm going to have to leave.
Well, I had told Bill, what the hell am I going up there for? He knows what happened. Well, he ain't quite what's happening. So I was scared to death. I was second lieutenant, my 5th mission. And so we appeared before Janey LeMay. And he said, what happened? I said, well, Shark told the story about the crosswing. Before we released the bomb, we were set on fire by this fog wolf. And then we dived down the road, released the bomb. Later on the Bernardian forest. And we were chased back to England by these fighters. Luckily, we made it back with no problem. They said, well, what was the cost for you missing the target? I said, I was on fire, sir. I couldn't drop the bombs because the pilot dropped us down. So it was really strange because I was scared to death. I didn't know if they was going to vote me or court-martial me, whatever it was. But he was a good man. I found out later on a lot about the man. That was actually, I have a short story signed by him. I have, as a wing bomber later on, I met him quite a few times. But he was a great person. I'm singing a song
I just want to say this. I had to have some accompaniment. Because I'm not a soloist. I sing with a lot of people. But the song you want me to sing is that. It goes like this.
Down in Roar Valley, sound a big poor bomb. Okay, got it. Down in Roar Valley, that valley so, some chairborne bastard said we must go. Like the big bombers, fighters go too. B-51 boys, what happened to you? So send me a letter, send it to me, send it in care of Starbuck Loop 3.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Can I get all the veterans up here before everybody comes up so we can set up some kind of a seating area here and get a photo and everything done? Thank you so much. Thank you to Bob Wolf. Thank you again for Janey LeMay Lodge and for the Palm Springs Air Museum for hosting us today. Thank you. Folks, one other thing that we're going to do here today, I almost forgot. We are going to unveil a new display here. Janey, could you come up here? You know, it was hidden. I couldn't do this. This is a new addition to our display. It was painted by Robert Bailey and recently acquired by the 100 Foundation. Bob Wolf, would you join us here?
No, I was with the original. I was with the 350.
Your name is Dewey. My name
It's an original painting that was done by Robert Bailey. It was on the cover of the book High Noon and is now part of our permanent display and owned by the foundation.
I can see one at home. Are you old man too? You bet. Oh, what a wonderful thing. I've never seen